Right, so dear EBAL 2708, this video is going to look at section 6 capital B, which is the additional medical expenses tax credit. So we are still within the calculation of the net normal tax liability. So we've calculated our taxable income. We used our tax tables to calculate our normal tax liability. We deducted from that our primary, secondary, or tertiary rebate, or all three, depending on the age of the taxpayer. And then if the taxpayer is a member of a medical aid, we also looked at the section 6 capital A medical scheme fees tax credit. So section 6B is an additional tax credit, and you don't have to belong to a medical aid to qualify for this one. You just have to have incurred or paid qualifying medical expenses. So it's important for this one to understand who a dependent is. If the taxpayer belongs to a medical aid, we will always look at the medical aid, because if somebody is a dependent in terms of the rules of the fund, then we will accept that for tax purposes. Alternatively, if we look at the definition of dependent, it's the spouse, partner, dependent, children, or other immediate family members of which the taxpayer is responsible for care and support. Who qualifies as a child? Now, it's important to understand here as well that when we talk about child, we're referring to adopted children, biological children, etc., etc. So it's not just, if it's somebody that is born from a person, you can also have adopted children, and they will qualify as a child in terms of the Tax Act. So there is a definition of a child, and you can go through that to determine who will, for tax purposes, qualify as a child. So in terms of section 6B, which amounts qualify? Firstly, contributions to the medical scheme. So we are going to take our contributions to our medical scheme into account for purposes of section 6 capital B. We did not do it for section 6 capital A, because 6A has got fixed monthly amounts. Then, if you have a look at this list, amounts paid to a medical practitioner, a dentist, a optometrist, amounts paid to a nursing home, a hospital, a midwife, amounts paid to a pharmacist for prescription medicines. So unfortunately, you can't go to Dis-Chem or Clicks and buy shampoo and conditioner and all of your toiletries and say, you paid an amount to a pharmacist. It has to be for prescription medicines. Amounts paid for medical services outside of South Africa, and then expenditure necessarily incurred and paid in consequence of a disability of a taxpayer, spouse, child, or dependent. So these are all things that will fall, if somebody in your immediate family is disabled or has a disability as defined, and a disability as defined means that it was a doctor that diagnosed you as such, and the prognosis is for at least a year. But if you, for example, have to make adjustments to your home, or you have to buy special equipment for that particular person's needs, then that will also qualify within medical expenses for the section 6B credit. Please remember that contributions to the medical scheme will be your own contributions, as well as contributions made by the employer on your behalf, because those amounts that an employer makes on behalf of an employee will be included in the gross income of the employee, because they are fringe benefits. They are deemed to have been actually paid by the employee for purposes of this particular tax credit. Also, you will see that all of these say paid. So that means it must actually have been paid to be able to use them in the calculation, not actually incurred. Please go back to your general deduction formula court cases and have a look at what is meant with actually incurred versus actually paid. Also important, you can't bring expenses into account if you are able to recover it from your medical aid. Medical aids sometimes work that you, as the member of the scheme, have to pay a doctor, for example, first, and then you can claim it back from the scheme. So if you are able to do that, in other words, you're able to recover the amount, you will not be able to use it in terms of your section 6B tax credit calculation, because then it wasn't actually paid by you because you were able to recover it. So who qualifies? Now here we're going to split, again, taxpayers between ages. So taxpayers 65 years and older. Then, and you'll see taxpayers younger than 65 but who have a disability, or a member of their immediate family, their dependents have a disability. Their calculation looks exactly the same as our taxpayers 65 years and older. If you are younger than 65 and you do not have a disability or a dependent with a disability, then your calculation looks a bit different. Okay, so let's see what these look like. Now, I want to really encourage you to use this method for calculating your Section 6B tax credit. You will see that the student's approach to natural persons, their examples will get to the same answer, but they don't necessarily do it the same way. Now, like I said, unfortunately, it's a marks game, right? And this format or this structure just makes it easier for me personally to do it. I mean, this is how if I do tax calculations for people, this is the format I use. But also for you, it forces you to go through the steps of this is where I start and this is where I'll end. So I use two columns here as well. The column on the far right will be where I'm doing my normal tax liability calculation. So this is the effect of the Section 6B tax credit. Now, how it starts is you start off with medical aid contributions. Now, this is if the taxpayer belonged to a medical aid. Of course, if the taxpayer did not belong to a medical aid, you will start here, right? So medical aid contributions, remember that it is the taxpayer's own as well as those that were contributed by an employer, because we would have been taxed on it as a fringe benefit. Then from that amount, we are going to deduct 3 times our Section 6A rebate that we calculated. Now remember, Section 6A is going to depend on the number of dependents, etc., and for how many months they belong to a medical aid. And this is a rule. So this is something you're going to have to study, right, and practice. So the rule says calculate the medical aid contributions and then reduce it by 3 times your Section 6A rebate. Right, that's going to give me subtotal 1. Now I just quickly want to make a comment. If this amount exceeds that amount, right, you cannot go into a negative over here. If the 3 times Section 6A rebate calculation is greater than your medical aid contributions, this will move to a 0. You can't work with a negative at subtotal 1. Once we've determined subtotal 1, or even if it's at a 0, you're going to go, what was my qualifying medical expenses? And those are the list on the previous slide. Add that to subtotal 1 to give me a subtotal 2, and then it's very straightforward. Take subtotal 2 and multiply it by 33.3%. So if I have to remember this for taxpayers 65 years and older and taxpayers with disabilities, I always remember the 3 and the 33.3%. Right, but this one is relatively simple, and ultimately what it does, it will reduce your normal tax liability. So let's have a look at a calculation using this recommended method. We've got David, he is 66 years old, and that immediately should get your juices flowing in terms of I'm dealing with a taxpayer who is older than 65. So for me, immediately in my head, what happens is 3 and 33.3%, right? Just for me to sort of remember that that's what I'm going to be working with. He contributed 3,000 Rand per month to a medical scheme on behalf of himself and his wife. So we know that there's 2 people on the medical scheme, the taxpayer plus a dependent. And he paid 23,500 qualifying medical expenses for the year, and his salary was 340,000. And what we have to determine is David's medical tax credits. Now, just remember the medical tax credits, we have 2. We have Section 6A and we have Section 6B. Now, Section 6A does not care about your age. The only thing it cares about is, did you belong to a medical aid and did you make contributions? So because we are dealing with a taxpayer plus one dependent, we work with 620 Rand. Multiply that by 12, because remember that is a monthly amount, and that's going to give me 7,440 Rand, which is my Section 6A tax credit. It reduces my normal tax liability. So to do the Section 6B tax credit, I firstly take the medical aid contributions, own, which is 36,000 Rand, plus if there were any, that of the employer. There is no employer in this instance, so 36,000 Rand is my medical aid contributions. I reduce that amount with 3 times my Section 6A credit. So 7,440 multiplied by 3, that's going to give me 22,320, which gives me, in terms of subtotal 1, 13,680. Add my qualifying medical expenses to get to subtotal 2, and then because we are dealing with the taxpayer 65 years and older, I will multiply that by 33.3% to give me my Section 6B tax credit. If we're dealing with a person with a disability or a dependent with a disability, we will use exactly the same method. So let's have a look at this one. Example 1.7, Lisa is 35, so not older than 65. She made contributions of 2,000 per month to a medical scheme on behalf of herself and her 2 children. So we have 3 people that is on this particular medical aid. She paid 23,500 qualifying medical expenses for the year. Her employer contributed 15,000 to the medical scheme. So there's a fringe benefit that I'm going to have to think about. She earned a salary of 275,000 Rand. Lisa's son has a disability. The moment that the taxpayer or any of their dependents have a disability, we are going to use the same method or the same calculation that we would use for a person older than 65. So I remember 33 and 33,3%. Let's have a look. So again, we start off with our Section 6A tax credit because she does belong to a medical aid. So it's Lisa and 2 children. So for her and her first dependent, it's 620. For each additional dependent, it's 209 Rand per month, which is going to give me a Section 6A tax credit of 9,948. To calculate the Section 6B tax credit, right, I take my medical aid contributions, which is Lisa's own, which is 2,000 multiplied by 12, 24,000, as well as that of her employer, 15,000, because she would have been taxed on this 15,000 as a fringe benefit. So we include both of those amounts when calculating her medical aid contributions. Because her son has a disability, we will reduce that 39,000 Rand by 3 times our Section 6A medical tax credit, and this effectively gives me subtotal 1, 9,156. Add qualifying medical expenses to give me 32,656, and then I multiply that by 33.3%, again because we have a dependent with a disability, to give me my Section 6B tax credit of 10,874. Now, just for completeness sake, I want to show you what happens if your subtotal 1 ends up in a negative. So for purposes of this example 1.7, assume that our 3 times Section 6A rebate calculation works out to 41,000. Okay, then 39,000 minus 41,000 is of course negative 2,000, but you can't be in a negative over here, which means we take it to 0. From there, the calculation looks exactly the same. Qualifying medical expenses, and then multiply that by 33.3%. Right. So the purpose of this particular slide is just to show you what happens if your 3 times Section 6A rebate exceeds your total medical contributions. Right, that brings us to Section 6B medical tax credit for taxpayers younger than 65 without any disability of either the taxpayer or a dependent. And you'll see it starts off very similar to the previous one we looked at. We start off by looking at the medical aid contributions, own as well as that of the employer. But then, ladies and gentlemen, it changes. So instead of multiplying our Section 6A rebate over here by 3, because we are dealing with a natural person who is younger than 65 and there's no disability, we multiply it by 4. So our total medical aid contributions less our Section 6A rebate multiplied by 4, that's going to give me subtotal 1. Again, if at this point in time your 4 times Section 6A rebate is higher than your total medical contributions, we will limit this one to 0. Then it looks quite similar, plus your qualifying medical expenses. That is going to bring you to a subtotal 2, right? Now, and this is where it significantly veers away from how we dealt with taxpayers older than 65 and also taxpayers younger than 65 where there was a disability. Because now what we are going to do is we are going to take subtotal 2 and we are going to reduce that with 7.5% of our taxable income. Again, this is a rule. So you are going to calculate 7.5% of your taxable income that you calculated over there in the framework, and you are going to deduct that against subtotal 2. If your 7.5% multiplied by taxable income calculation is higher than subtotal 2, again, here you will end up with a 0. You cannot have a negative amount. However, if at this point in time you do get an amount, in other words, your subtotal 2 was higher than your 7.5% calculation, you calculate your Section 6B medical tax credit by multiplying with 25%. And this is how I remember the younger than 65 years. It's multiplied by 4 for the Section 6A rebate, and then the actual percentage for determining the tax credit is 25, right? And I mean, 100 divided by 4 is 25. And then if you think about 3 and 33.3 for older than 65, it makes sense to me. So let's have a look at an example. Example 1.8, Joe is 35 years old. He made contributions of 6,000 Rand per month to a medical scheme on behalf of himself, his wife, and a child. So again, we have 3 dependents or members of the medical aid. He paid 50,000 Rand qualifying medical expenses, and his employer contributed 40,000 to a medical scheme during the year. That's important because that's going to give me my fringe benefit. And he earned a salary of 500,000 Rand. Let's have a look at his Section 6B calculation. So we start off by saying, what is the 6A medical credit? Because we are dealing with a taxpayer and 2 dependents, we'll work with 620 plus 209 multiplied by 12. To get to my Section 6B medical tax credit, I start off with my medical aid contributions, Joe's own contributions, so 6,000 multiplied by 12, as well as the fringe benefit that he was taxed on, the contributions made by his employer, 40,000. That gives me 112,000, and that then is reduced by 4 times my Section 6A rebate. That's going to give me 72,202. To that, I'm going to add 50,000 in terms of qualifying medical expenses to bring me to subtotal 2. Just in case I didn't say it, that's subtotal 1, right? Subtotal 2 of 122,208. And now we have to take our taxable income of 540,000 Rand. And I want to challenge you to figure that 540,000 Rand out on your own. How did they get to that 540,000 taxable income? But we're going to take the taxable income, multiply it by 7.5%, which is going to give me 40,500. And I'm going to deduct that against my subtotal 2. So I reduce subtotal 2 with 7.5% of my taxable income. That leaves me with about 81,000 in terms of subtotal 3, and that then is multiplied by 25% to give me my Section 6B tax credit. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes Section 6B. Again, home tax is your friend. You need to practice this. Okay.